In this video, I'm gonna share 4 secrets to taking banger product photos. You don't wanna miss number 4 because most beginners skip it and it ruins their photos. But I don't wanna get ahead of myself, so let's get into the first tip. And it has to do with making breakfast. Hear me out. So you wake up in the morning and you make some toast. Now toast is great, but it's nothing to die for in my opinion. But let's now say instead of just toast, you decide to add some sausage, eggs, and a cup of milk. Suddenly, you know, now we're talking. That's a pretty good meal. Breakfast is a lot like set design. When you have multiple elements together, they're more interesting. Now there are a few things you're gonna wanna keep in mind when building out your set. The first being, what is the theme of the photo? Is it dark, colorful, country? I mean, it could be literally whatever. Once you've decided on your theme, it's time to go prop hunting. This can include paper backdrops, photography boards, different textures, glass, and of course, you know, just like different set pieces. Now, before you go out and spend a lot of money, first just look around your own house. You'd be surprised how many ordinary objects could be used as props for photos. But if you do have a budget, it's never a bad idea to get some stuff off of Amazon or maybe at Hobby Lobby to make your photo truly unique. Oh, and a bonus tip, once you buy a prop, keep it. In my closet, I have 2 boxes full of completely random stuff, you know, fake glass, feathers, tiny wood pieces, and just random stuff to use as props for future shoots. Okay, so now you have all your props, it's time to start putting them in your scene. The key thing here is to avoid cluttering your scene with too many props. Use them to add some depth and texture to your scene, but don't overdo it. You know, you kind of want to let the product and image breathe a little bit. Now that your set is looking good, it's time to talk camera settings. Shooting products is way different than other creative assets. Most of the time, people like shooting at the lowest possible aperture to get that super cool cinematic blurry background. But personally, I like when the entire product is in focus, so that means I shoot at apertures of f13 or even f16. For my shutter speed, if it's a still image, I typically set that to 1/125. If I am capturing some sort of high-speed action, I will obviously raise my shutter speed and lower my aperture before I start raising my ISO. This just helps ensure that I get a nice, clean image. At this point, you should have your scene and camera set up. Now you just need to light it. Lighting really makes or breaks a product photo, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all. How you light a product really comes down to the final look you're trying to achieve. But not only that, different products have different finishes. Some are matte while others are reflective, and both of those require different approaches. As you can tell, lighting is an absolute beast, and I can't cover everything in this video, but here are some common setups and some common things you need to avoid. This will get you 95% of the way there, and the rest just comes down to, you know, experimenting and obviously practice. First, you got the classic 3-point lighting setup. This starts with your key light 45 degrees to the side and 45 degrees up. From there, I'll either use a white or black foam core board, depending on if I want some positive or negative fill. I also commonly use a light to light up the backdrop and a light for the rim light on the product. I use this setup for 95% of all of my shots. Another common setup is the light on the very side. This is a great setup for moody shots, especially if you combine it with some negative fill. I'll also use this setup if I want more prominent shadows in my scene. The next setup is a backlight. This is extremely popular if you're shooting whiskey and beauty products, and that's because the backlight typically makes the liquid inside of the product glow, and it just looks very appealing. But it usually requires another light or reflector to make sure the logo of the product is still visible and not just shadows. But regardless of how you light your product, here are some things that you need to avoid at all costs. The first being hotspots. Hotspots are bright spots on your product caused by your lights. These are a key sign to any beginner photographer. So to avoid this, I almost always double diffuse my light, which means I'll put on a modifier and then use either a scrim gym or diffusion paper to diffuse that light again. This ensures that the light hitting my product is, you know, smooth and soft. Now this is probably only necessary if you're shooting a product with a reflective finish. If your product has a matte finish, you can probably get away with just using a modifier or running your light through, you know, a diffusion or scrim gym. Another thing you want to avoid is flat lighting. Now there is a time and place for that. Maybe with like UGC or lifestyle content, but typically you want some contrast in your lighting. Now, a lot of the images that you see are fake, and no, I'm not talking about AI. I'm talking about editing, and specifically using masks. That's where photos get their final look. Masking is my favorite part of the editing process, and that's because you can do so much. You can see that mask really helps shape the light in your image and just make it look a little bit better and more appealing. I almost always put a mask on the product to sharpen it and brighten it up. From there, I might use a radial mask to lower the exposure of the sides of the image, bringing more focus to the product. Or I might use a linear gradient to, brighten up the side of the key light, and then use another linear gradient to darken the shadow side of the image. Once again, that brings more focus to the product. Now, obviously that isn't the only way that you can use mask when you're editing, but that's typically what I do, and that's what I would recommend for beginners because it isn't too difficult to execute. Now, if you put everything together that we talked about in this video, you're well on your way to taking absolutely banger product photos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.